The wooden wagon groaned under the weight of 6 bodies, its wheels biting deep into the rutted dirt path. Inside, the space was tight. Knees knocked against shoulders, and every jolt of the carriage sent a ripple of movement through the group. Donna, Sauna, Nana, Mark, Vamp, and Fern sat in a heavy, expectant silence, listening to the rhythmic thud of hooves against the dry earth. The air inside the wagon was stale, thick with the scent of pine and damp dust. Without warning, the wagon lurched violently. The horse let out a sharp, strained whinny before coming to a dead stop. The sudden stillness was jarring. Amelia stood at the front, her grip tight on the reins, before she turned back to face them. She reached into her pack, pulled out a weathered scroll, and tossed it onto the floorboards. It unrolled with a dry, snapping sound, hitting the wood with a heavy thud. "A new quest," she announced. The group leaned in, their eyes locking onto the parchment. The mystery of their destination hung in the air, a silent weight. They turned the wagon toward the jagged silhouette of the Whispering Peaks. For the first day, the wheels held, but the incline grew steeper with every mile. By the second day, the path dissolved into loose shale and narrow, winding goat trails. The wagon frame shrieked under the strain until a rear axle snapped, forcing them to abandon the vehicle and continue on foot. They climbed through the thin, freezing air of the high passes, their breath hitching in the biting cold. Rocks shifted under their boots, sending cascades of stone into the deep, echoing ravines below. They moved in a line, hands gripping frozen granite, pulling themselves over ridges that seemed to scrape the sky. Muscles burned and lungs ached, but the group pushed forward, driven by the map they had studied. On the third day, the terrain finally leveled out into a vast, rolling plateau. The wind, which had been a constant, howling presence, suddenly died down. They crested the final ridge, and there it was. Far across the valley, the golden spires of the July Kingdom caught the afternoon light, piercing the horizon like needles of fire. The sight cut through their exhaustion, offering a tangible promise of safety and purpose. They stood at the edge of the descent, watching the light dance off the distant towers, and began the final trek toward the gates. The heavy iron-bound doors of the throne room swung inward, revealing a hall carved from deep, light-absorbing stone. At the far end, Queen Forth sat upon a chair of polished obsidian that seemed to drink the torchlight. She did not rise as they approached. She watched them with a steady, unblinking gaze that measured the grit still clinging to their boots from the mountain pass. The air in the room felt pressurized, heavy with the weight of unspoken demands. She gestured once, a sharp flick of her wrist. Negotiations were brief and cold. She spoke of the threat looming in the woods, her voice echoing against the vaulted ceiling. When the terms were settled, she turned her head toward the dark corners of the hall. 2 figures detached themselves from the shadows. "Julia and Buna will join your party," the queen commanded. Her tone left no room for debate. They turned, the group now larger and more uncertain than before, and headed back toward the waiting wagon. The wagon rolled away from the golden spires, the road narrowing until it became a mere scar through the dense, tangled undergrowth. As they passed the threshold of the forbidden woods, the light failed. The canopy above knit itself into a solid ceiling, blocking the sun, turning the afternoon into a bruised, gray twilight. The temperature plummeted. Breath began to plume in the air, white and sharp. Donna pulled the reins, but the horses slowed, their ears pinned back. Nostrils flared at the scent of damp rot and stagnant moss. The wheels groaned as they struck thick, gnarled roots that snaked across the path like frozen veins. Every revolution of the wheel required more effort, the wood frame straining against the resistance of the forest floor. The companions sat in the wagon, pulled tight against one another, but the cold seeped through, the floorboards, biting into their skin. Silence took hold, heavy and absolute. No birds sang, no insects clicked. Nana reached out to touch the side of the wagon, pulling her hand back instantly. The wood was slick with a thin, unnatural frost. The horses shrieked, rearing up until the harness snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The wagon lurched, throwing the occupants against the wooden sides as the animals bolted into the dark. Silence shattered. From the dense thicket to the left, the earth erupted. A massive, multi-limbed shape tore through the brush, snapping ancient trunks as if they were dry twigs. It landed in the center of the path, its weight causing the ground to buckle and heave. The creature stood tall, limbs twitching with a rhythmic, sickening fluidity. In its primary grip, it clutched a jagged stone. The object pulsed with a rhythmic, deep violet light that bled into the surrounding mist, staining the air a bruised, unnatural hue. Every time the stone throbbed, the ground beneath the group vibrated, sending tremors up through their boots. The beast let out a low, grinding sound that vibrated in their very marrow. It did not attack immediately. It stood, head tilted, the violet mist swirling around its jagged edges. The companions sat paralyzed. Nana gripped the edge of the wagon, her knuckles white, unable to draw a breath. Mark stared at the pulsing stone, his eyes wide, locked in a trance of pure, unadulterated fear. The beast slammed its heavy fists into the dirt, the impact sending a shockwave that knocked the remaining equipment from the wagon floor. The forest floor groaned under the pressure. Fern did not wait for the order. He vaulted from the wagon, his blade singing as he swung it in a desperate arc toward the creature's midsection. The metal connected with a jarring, high-pitched screech, but the beast did not even flinch. It merely flicked a massive, clawed limb. The impact caught Fern in the chest, sending him flying backward through the air. He slammed into the trunk of a nearby oak, his sword clattering to the forest floor in two jagged pieces. He slumped, gasping for air, unable to rise. The creature turned its focus toward the remaining group, its violet stone pulsing with a blinding, rhythmic intensity. Nana screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the beast's low, guttural growl. The ground continued to heave, threatening to topple the wagon entirely. Vamp realized that steel was useless against such a force. She stepped forward, planting her feet firmly in the churned mud. Her eyes locked onto the beast's shifting limbs. She raised her hands, fingers splayed, and began to trace complex, glowing runes into the freezing air. The light from her fingertips burned with a fierce, golden intensity. "Prepare for the fusion spell," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. She pushed the final rune into place, and the ground began to hum. The golden runes ignited, spinning into a blinding vortex that anchored itself to the forest floor. A circle of pure light expanded rapidly, catching Fern and Julia in its pull. They did not scream. They were simply drawn forward, their bodies becoming translucent as they crossed the threshold of the spell. The violet mist from the creature surged, trying to choke the golden light, but the circle pulsed, expanding with a violent, rhythmic thrum. The air grew heavy, smelling of ozone and ancient fire. Fern and Julia merged, their forms folding into one another in a blur of shifting light and shadow. The ground cracked under the sudden weight of a new presence. From the center of the radiance, a massive serpentine neck whipped upward, followed by wings that spanned the width of the clearing. Shimmering scales, hard as diamond, caught the golden glow and reflected it back in blinding flashes. The dragon let out a roar that tore through the trees, a sound so raw it shattered the violet mist into harmless sparks. The creature stumbled, its multi-limbed stance faltering as the dragon's tail lashed out, carving a trench through the earth. The dragon's eyes, burning with a fierce, intelligent light, locked onto the beast. It lunged, its massive frame blocking out the sky, and the forest fell silent. The dragon did not hesitate. It slammed its talons into the creature's chest, pinning the beast against the earth with enough force to crater the ground. The monster shrieked, a sound like grinding metal, as it thrashed beneath the dragon's weight. Its limbs went limp, one by one, until the violet mist began to leak. With a final, shuddering contraction, the creature dissolved into a pile of gray ash, leaving nothing behind but the jagged, pulsing stone. Vamp moved forward, her hand still trembling from the strain of the spell. She knelt beside the stone and began a low, rhythmic chant. The violet light fought back, flaring with a sudden, violent intensity that scorched the surrounding grass. Vamp gritted her teeth and pushed harder. The violet hue began to bleach away, replaced by a warm, crystalline radiance. The stone stopped its frantic pulsing, smoothing out until it became a perfectly clear orb. It floated upward, hovering at eye level, before drifting slowly toward the spot where Fern lay. The orb touched his chest and sank directly into his skin. Fern's eyes snapped open, glowing with a faint, lingering light. As the dragon form dissipated into golden dust, the woods fell into a heavy stillness. The journey back to the cabin felt longer than the entire trek to the Forbidden Woods. No one spoke. The wagon wheels ground against the dirt path with a rhythmic, hollow sound that seemed to echo the exhaustion in their bones. Dona gripped the reins, her knuckles white, while the others huddled in the back, staring at nothing. Fern sat perfectly still, his hand pressed against his chest where the orb had vanished. Every few minutes, he would draw a sharp, shallow breath, his eyes darting to the shadows of the trees, as if expecting the forest to follow them home. When the cabin finally appeared, a silhouette against the fading twilight, the relief was palpable. They abandoned the wagon in the yard, leaving their supplies scattered across the floorboards. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Dona moved to the hearth, striking a match and feeding dry wood into the iron grate. The flames caught, licking at the logs until a steady, orange glow filled the room. One by one, they collapsed onto the floor. The silence was heavy, thick with the memory of the dragon and the ash. They watched the embers pop and fade. The journey was over, but the weight of what they had witnessed remained, tethering them to the hearth and to each other in the quiet dark.